Welcome to our conversation today on the power of the portfolio, how iconic brands stay future ready. My name is Ramin Satuda. I'm the editor-in-chief of Variety, and I am so excited to be sitting down with our panel today. I'm going to introduce them right now. Sitting right next to me is Charlotte Blank, U.S. Chief Marketing Officer at Jaguar Land Rover North America. She is leading a bold new era for Jaguar, pushing the brand forward with its Copy Nothing campaign. Let's give her a round of applause. Next, we have Steve James, the global head of marketing and communications at BNY. He is driving transformation at one of the world's most established financial institutions and one of the oldest. So let's give a warm round of applause to Steve. And sitting at the end is Susan Reno, Global Chief Marketing Officer at Pfizer. She is redefining what it means to lead a healthcare brand, building trust and working to make healthcare more user-friendly. So I'm very, very excited to get into it, and we have a lot of things we want to talk about. But since everyone has been so busy at South by Southwest and we've been talking and hearing from such great, brilliant speakers, I wanted to start by asking everyone on stage to tell me a little bit about where you came from, where you live, and your claim to fame. So why don't we start, Charlotte? Why don't we start with you?
I'm Charlotte. I live in Sleepy Hollow, which is New York, which is also where I came from, found my way back to my hometown. Work for Jaguar Land Rover, which our U.S. headquarters is in Mahwah, New Jersey. My claim to fame or my superpower is marketing by way of psychology. So my background is very much in the neuroscience and behavioral science academic realm. So I try to approach everything I do like a scientist would, which is to say running experiments.
Really cool. So my name is Steve James. I live in New York City. By way of DC, by way of Los Angeles, which is interesting. I found a lot of other folks here who have that same kind of circle around the country. My claim to fame, I'd say, is I have had the opportunity to rebrand 4 very large financial institutions, starting with Capital One, moving to TIAA, CREF to TIA, then Fannie Mae, and now BNY.
Great, and I'm Susan. So I live sort of part-time in London, part-time in New York, by way of lots of cities. So I've lived in a number of cities across the US, but also Brussels and London as well. And my claim to fame is I have created the highest performing pharmaceutical ad that System 1 has ever tested.
And what is that ad?
It was our Super Bowl ad, which some of you may have just seen in February.
Can you give us any indication of how high it performed?
It was a 4.4, which the average for pharmaceutical industry is 1.3. So it's dramatically better than the average for the industry. And also the number 8 of the whole Super Bowl. So it broke the top 10 for the whole Super Bowl according to System 1.
I love it. We're breaking news and getting into numbers already. I live in New York City. I have been a journalist since I was in junior high school. I was editor-in-chief of my junior high school paper, editor-in-chief of my high school paper, editor-in-chief of my college paper, and I'm very, very lucky to lead Variety. And my claim to fame is that I've written 2 books, and my last book was about Donald Trump, and I interviewed him 6 times after he left the White House. So if you want to read my book, it's called Apprentice in Wonderland. And Donald Trump was someone who really understood the power of branding and the power of being able to talk about his brand and making sure people understand his brand. And so I want to talk about what it means to be a legacy brand, because there's so much noise right now. There's so much headlines. There's so much confusion and chaos around the world. And there's an entirely new generation coming up. And there's TikTok and social media and different ways in which people are expressing themselves. So how do you have a legacy brand with a rich history, but also evolve so that an up-and-coming consumer is interested in your brand? Let's start with you, Charlotte.
We talk about being a collection of brands with heritage, which is different from being a heritage brand. And we can talk more about of our 4 brands. Jaguar was the one that made a lot of news this year. with an indication of a forthcoming, dramatic rebrand, and people were a little upset about it because there were some, classic or traditionalists who kind of fall in that British racing green, E-type of the 1960s archetype of what a Jaguar is. But I love this quote. One of our executive leaders in the UK said, it's like the Church of England. Everyone wants it to exist, but no one goes to church. It's like at some point you have to evolve with the times, and everybody's going through this disruption, but man, is auto moving fast, and Jaguar is trying something really different to make it into the future. We're changing everything about the product, the go-to-market, yes, the logo, yes, the vibe, but we're doing it with data and with, the key insights of what transcends the past and the future. There are some common threads, but very purposefully letting go of a lot of that stuff. So it's uncomfortable, but it's important.
Yeah, so BNY has a rich legacy, and when you kind of are leading branding at a company that has a long legacy, it's a responsibility that you have and how you take that legacy forward. BNY was started in 1784, the first company that was traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and we're very much really focused on our clients from a financial services perspective and thinking about, how can we help them through the years? And our brand, our DNA is really resiliency and trust. We handle about $52 trillion in assets globally. That's 20% of the world's investable assets are trusted with BNY. We work with over 90% of the Fortune 100 and 100 companies. So there's a rich legacy and a rich history into what we've done, and we have to take that and think about when we want to do something a little different, change our perception, how do we ensure that that strong legacy and that history, it's a responsibility that we take, and we take in marketing communications in the whole company very seriously. How do we bring that along with where we want to go in the future to make sure that we don't lose that or disconnect from where we were and drive that legacy forward?
That's great. And from a Pfizer standpoint, so for those of you who aren't aware, Pfizer has been around for 175 years. I feel incredibly privileged to have the role to be able to take that forward. But Pfizer, as a pharmaceutical company, inherently has to move from product to product to product. So innovation is built into our entire business model. So if you think about, like in the 40s, what Pfizer was known for is we mass-produced the penicillin that then went with the troops across to D-Day and actually made sure that soldiers weren't dying from infections across D-Day, which is an amazing thing. When I arrived about 23 years ago, the company was known for creating breakthroughs in erectile dysfunction. Probably a lot of you remember that. We went on through an era of focusing on high cholesterol. We had, of course, many people are familiar with the work that we did during COVID. So trying to bring a vaccine at record time to be able to help to deal with the pandemic. And now we are embarking on our next era, which is focused on bringing breakthroughs to cancer. So there are some very clear threads through that heritage around science, around innovation, about being patient-oriented, trustworthy. Those sorts of themes are things that stay with us through all of these eras and are things that are important to us and things that we believe are worth protecting. But what that actually means in terms of which patients, what products, how we actually support those patients has changed dramatically over time. So I think all of us that work with the company feel a tremendous both privilege and also responsibility to be bringing breakthroughs to patients in whatever form the company is in at that particular era. But it has been interesting to watch sort of, although it's a very old company, by the nature of the way the business actually operates, you are constantly innovating, whether that's R&D, marketing, et cetera. It's sort of built into the DNA of how the company works.
Can you give us a case study? I know you gave us a series of examples, but can you give us a case study where you really did embrace change and take a big leap forward with one of your campaigns?
Yeah, so I can give you an example of something we launched last year. So we launched last year, I guess if I back up, the impetus for this was coming out of COVID. Of course, we're a household name in a way that lots of pharmaceutical companies aren't. And we have a great deal of trust that also because of the lack of awareness that a lot of pharmaceutical companies don't have. So what we were interested in was how do we take that trust and do something that is more helpful, more broadly than just the medicines that we create. So we know that the US healthcare system is tremendously fragmented. It's very confusing. It's very overwhelming to consumers to try to navigate it. And so last year we launched a platform called Pfizer for All. So Pfizer for All is designed to be able to help shorten that whole patient journey from identification of symptoms through to it has a connection into telehealth where you can go immediately talk to an independent healthcare provider, if appropriate, get a diagnosis, if appropriate, get a treatment. We also have at-home delivery the same day of tests and diagnostics and treatments and vaccines if those are the things that are appropriate. You can schedule a vaccine, et cetera, right? So it's adjacent to our business. It's not directly related to our business, but it is a way of us being able to use the brand equity that we've created as a result of the innovation that we've brought to be able to create a digital platform to solve some of the challenges that exist in the healthcare system. So we started with migraine and vaccines. We, in February, added cancer and atrial fibrillation, and then last week we added menopause. And so we will keep adding therapy areas as we go to be able to help support patients to be able to shorten the patient journey.
And the association with Pfizer during COVID, because I know we were all trying to get our Pfizer vaccine shots, allows you to then teach your consumer about all the other things you're doing, correct, in the healthcare space?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you do the market research on what Pfizer means, Pfizer is a trusted brand. The quality of the science and the belief in the fact that we do our science properly and those sorts of things is, we obviously, like all brands, have detractors, but the general perception is that that's quite strong. So if you think about the amount of healthcare information that exists out there, and treatment, recommendations are changing all of the time. There's misinformation that exists out there. Going through Pfizer for All sort of gives you a credibility and a trustworthiness, because if we are choosing to either provide the information or link out to a partner to do something, we're sort of vouching for the trustworthiness of that entire process. So it's the brand equity itself is what sort of gave us the ability to be able to create that sort of opening with consumers to help them in other ways.
Steve, can you give us a case study, and also how has your customer changed since the 1700s, would you say?
Just a little. For companies to be around, Pfizer for over 170
75, yeah.
years, BNY now 241 years, you can't do the same things, right? You have to innovate. You have to find new ways of tackling problems, new businesses to enter, new things to do. And BNY is of course, doing that. I'll say I count myself somewhat lucky to have joined a company that is really focused on innovation and change and how we can help our clients do more and help them grow. And one area that we've really focused on over the course of the last year or so or a couple of years, is AI. We were the first large bank to actually bring in NVIDIA SuperPods on-prem and build out our own AI system, really within our four walls. And we call that platform Eliza. And we call it Eliza because Eliza is the name of the wife of our founder, Alexander Hamilton, his wife Eliza. And we have over 50% of our employees who use Eliza, our AI platform, to help them in their day-to-day jobs. 50%, my team is somewhere at 80%. We're trying to get the company even higher. We build AI agents that help us from daily mundane tasks to really interesting, unique tasks. And then from an AI perspective, we just announced an agreement with OpenAI to use OpenAI tools into our AI platform to help us for many ways to enhance the Eliza work and what we're doing with Eliza. In another way around AI, we just announced that we launched our first pure digital employee. And so this is a AI employee that has a badge number, a login, and everything else, and is doing some tasks that we want to make sure we're getting right, but can be very, very, very labor intensive. And so having those kind of new innovations and those new things go along with a trusted and historied brand that is focused on how do we serve our clients different going forward.
How do you position that and explain AI, given that there are many consumers that are scared of AI?
Well, it's not just consumers, right? We all know it's consumers, it's our employees. We're very focused on that. It's regulators, it's the industry, it's our clients. So we really have to make sure we're thinking about the concerns that they have from an employee perspective, right? We're all experiencing this. There's a nervousness on our teams of, is this going to replace me, or is it going to enhance my ability to get my job done? And we're really focused on that. I mean, anytime a new technology comes in, there is that worry, right? There's that worry that as an employee, my skills and what I'm good at are no longer going to be valued. And so working with employees on that's why we have over 50% of our employees using our AI ELIZA tool. How do we make sure our employees are engaged in using it and leaning in and on the forefront? And I can tell you I just sat with, we have a group of analysts who just graduated college in our team, and we talked a lot about how they used AI in college and now how they're using and how excited they are that we have this platform that they get to use, in the business world, in the real world. And so the different audiences, it's important with the regulators ensuring the safety and soundness, with our clients helping them use AI. Many of them haven't done what we've done from an AI perspective, and they're interested in learning more about what we're doing. So there's a lot of different constituents and audiences that we've got to make sure we're bringing along in the right way on the journey.
Charlotte, I want to talk to you a little bit about a case study. Maybe can we talk about Jaguar's Copy Nothing campaign, which is a really innovative campaign that you guys have introduced to the marketplace?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, there's a lot to say. That was a really big, kind of unexpectedly big moment, to be honest, that happened sort of late November this year, which was essentially just a teaser. It was just a teaser video to show the world kind of with a wink and a nod that the brand is going to change dramatically. So globally, we put out the teaser video on, I think, just one organic post on X, and like the world went crazy. There was no car in the feature, which was part of the controversy, but it introduced this kind of new vibe, this new brand world of like a very dramatic departure from the past that I set up a little bit earlier in our talk about heritage. And people, reacted really, really strongly to it. And we heard a much louder voice than, we've heard in decades from, the people who were, thought of Jaguar in a more traditional way. But thankfully, we were able to convert this tidal wave of attention and eyeballs toward the reveal of the concept car, which we did at Art Miami in early December. And the car is just so badass and awesome, and it was really well received by the automotive press, so that it kind of all worked according to plan. But we were all like a little bit wide-eyed going into Miami, like holy yes. But now we've got a lot of attention on the car. It's up to us to sort of maintain that attention. There's still a while before the car goes on sale, or even before we reveal the commercial saleable vehicle as opposed to the design concept. And so the case study kind of happens in between, and it's the behind the scenes work that we're doing now to learn a little from the organic reaction, but not too much, because this really is a concerted effort to reach a completely new audience given a totally different go-to-market strategy. But there are these kind of threads that maintain a link to the history, and it's these deeper psychological truths about the Jaguar brand mixed with some really interesting insights we've gotten from showing a panel of people the concept car, basically like a large-scale body of psychologically informed market research that found the most predictive traits for people who really like the concept car, really validated our intuition that these people are, number one, rebellious. Number two, score really high in something called schema flexibility, meaning they're more easily than average able to sort of adapt their concept of things. Like, this is what a car should be, or this is how a man should dress, or whatever the category is, they're able to be flexible with that schema, which is a really rich territory to play in psychologically. And then we see a lot of just heavy status consciousness, flash, sex appeal, showing off their style. This is not your stealth wealth Range Rover Succession vibe. This is like, I got it, I'm flaunting it. And that's also something really fun to play with. So just recently, while we still had the concept cars in market before they go off to another part of the world on their tour, we activated at the NBA All-Star Game and did a partnership that had sort of a physical on-site presence and amplified it in digital and audio media, and played up that NBA massive cultural trend of the hallway walk, which puts these like big, traditionally masculine athletes in the context of a catwalk, and they're wearing these like really avant-garde individual style everybody with their different looks and showing off their creative originality, which is at the core of the brand. It's copy of nothing, which, by the way, the phrase copy of nothing came from Sir William Lyons 100 years ago or whatever, how many years ago, don't quote me on the number. But it's part of our history. That sense of being different and original and breaking molds is very Jaguar, and it's very classic Jaguar. But bringing it into the future, has this kind of bold, modern, flashy kind of take that when you see the car, it really makes sense. So the NBA All-Star activation really validated a lot of our intuition of how this could work for the U.S.
Have you driven the car?
I have not personally driven it, but I have seen it. There is a drivable version in the UK.
And how many people, can you share with us how many people have actually driven it?
Just a handful of executives, yeah.
It's interesting how much you know about your consumer or the way in which your consumer reacts to a campaign. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that. How well do you know your consumer, your audience, and how do you learn more about them?
This, as I said, is like my kind of secret sauce or whatever. It's really just what I love about marketing is the psychology of it all. So it's been my focus, especially for the past year. We've literally brought in a partnership with a group of hardcore scientists, these behavioral scientists who come from academia, have partnered with machine learning tools to kind of scale their expertise. And we basically have this nascent tool that helps to study people with rigorous, academically validated metrics, everything from your big 5 personality traits to like 600 other ways you might categorize people on a spectrum of traits. And then we're able to sort of match that up to whatever stimulus we want to show, like a brand proposition, a car, a new creative campaign, and then see what is most predictive about people who resonate with the brand. And that's been the most useful thing for me to inform all creative thinking and just helping us really separate each of our brands as we go into a very important new strategy at JLR, which is our house of brand strategy. So we actually no longer go to market as Land Rover, but Land Rover fades into sort of a parent brand, while Range Rover, Defender, and Discovery each live as their own distinct brands, no longer nameplates. That's a huge transition to make for consumers, and it really requires us to go deeper than just the demographics. You know, there's some differences in household income, but not enough to make meaningful different choices in our media planning, for example. But when you get into what drives these people, what makes them really unique in terms of their behavioral motivators, that's where the interesting stuff happens.
And that is a big change. What would you say prompted that change? What led to Jaguar shaking things up in such a big way?
Yeah, the House of Brand strategy, I mean, is a global decision, so that happened kind of before me, and I got to help shepherd it in the U.S. And it's really, I think, a response to moving with the market into this ultra luxury space, that there's a lot of growth in wealth, and we see that happening, especially in our Range Rover customers. But we see enough room there for Defender, for example, to be a luxury brand of its own, rather than sort of existing as a stepping stone or a hierarchy within the Land Rover portfolio. Defender is every bit a luxury brand as Range Rover is, but just in a very different way. You know, the people who experience a wealthy lifestyle, but in the Defender flavor, are doing it outside in a really active way. They're into biofitness and technology forward health trends and all of these interesting nuggets that pop for them differently than we see in Range Rover, and it just helps us, as I said, bring them to life more. But that's kind of what drives the strategy, is for us to take inspiration from, say, the LVMHs of the world, which is a house of luxury brands as opposed to just the one.
That's really, really interesting. Steve, how do you get to know your customer?
So we are at the core client obsessed. We use that language across the board, and everything that we do, are focused on, in everyone in the company, on what's that outcome we're driving for the client. And so we do a lot of things to engage with our clients. You know, we have advisory panels where we're sitting one-to-one and sharing things that, you know, are going to come out soon, and ask them, does this make sense for you? How would you think about doing this going forward? How would you communicate this? We do a lot of research as well with our clients, and different levels of a client. So you could be working in a decision maker as a CFO or a CEO or a CIO, and really understanding their needs and what's important to them in the way that we make decisions. So we do a lot of work, both one-on-one and through, you know, really through studies with our clients. And one of the places that we spent a lot of time is when we started to look at refreshing our brand in 2024, and we went to our clients and we said, what's important about our brand today? And what would be important about the brand of the future? And how would you like to see us go through that transformation or that transition? And they came back with 3 really important things. The first was, don't completely transform. Go in a way that you're keeping that heritage of who you are and what makes you so valuable, and evolve to that future and where you're going. We don't want whiplash from what is this new BNY. And the second piece was continue that trust, that transparency, that resiliency that makes you such a great partner to work with. And those 2 things were extremely important for us as we really thought through that transformation plan and how we're going to get to a different place with our brand, listening to our clients, making sure we're focused on their needs, and in that kind of that transition, what was important to them. So we then took, of course, how do we communicate, and how do we communicate the value proposition of what we're creating to our clients? And the other piece they told us is, share the innovation you're doing, right? Spend time with the innovation. I talked a bit about AI, and we're innovating in a lot of different areas as well. And they wanted us to share more about the innovation. So we really tweaked the brand to be more innovative, focused on modernizing it, while continuing to hold that trustworthiness and that, those pieces that made us so core to helping them grow and achieve their goals as our clients. So that client interaction, that client feedback from many different sources drives not just what we do from a marketing communication standpoint, but from an innovation standpoint, a new product standpoint, a solution standpoint. So really focused on making sure that we're helping those clients, especially when, they're running into challenges and issues that, maybe they haven't had before with new digital technologies like digital assets, alternative ways of investing. And so we're trying to find that forefront of how do we take it and go along with them versus having them have to wait for us to catch up.
Susan, Pfizer's could be for everyone. So how do you find your clients, given that healthcare is something that we all need?
So, I think what's interesting about my business, maybe compared to the other businesses on stage, is, of course, consumers can't buy medicines directly or vaccines directly. So we actually work on parallel paths in terms of thinking about what healthcare professionals are looking for in terms of how they want to support their patients, and then also about patients directly. So you have to sort of connect those 2 up, and we do a lot of work to make sure that we understand your classic attitudinal segmentation and all of that, right? So, and tailoring messages to each of those individual segments, making sure you have the right, most effective messages that you can. But one of the things for me that's been a really interesting journey over the last sort of year or so has been our ability to actually start to more seriously test the outcome of our communications themselves before they go on board. So Charlotte and I were talking backstage about how much we both love System 1. But System 1, if you take the Super Bowl ad as an example, we put that ad through, more than a dozen rounds of testing. And it tells you second by second by second what is the emotional reaction of the audience and what are they feeling and thinking, And we were tweaking things half a second here, half a second there to make sure that we were achieving the kind of response that we hoped to be able to achieve. So if you look at, back when I was a very junior consumer marketer, for those of you who have been around for a while, you will remember ARS. We used to go into ARS testing. You would do a single test at the end once the ad was ready, and then you'd put it out on air and hope that it did well. Now, we are making real-time adjustments to very specific things across each second of an ad to be able to make it more and more effective and make it resonate better with the consumers that we're looking at. So there's a lot of foundational research around healthcare professionals and consumers and what do they want and some of that kind of classic stuff that we do across all of our brands. But the really forensic analysis about how our communications are coming across and what do we need to adjust in order to make them more effective has been something that we have put in place just over the last year or so, and it has dramatically improved the effectiveness of our communications.
What have you learned from the testing? What are words that consumers like versus words that they don't like when talking about healthcare?
So, so if you take Super Bowl ad as an example, so when we started thinking about how we were going to be talking about Pfizer's innovation, Pfizer works on lots of different therapy areas. So the original version of the ad that people will have seen on air actually talked about multiple different therapy areas. It talked about cancer, but it also talked about RSV and a couple of others. So the idea was to try to show the breadth of the innovation that we're working on. And what we found is that that was actually tremendously confusing to people, that they couldn't, you can't, it's not a single person that has all of those things. There are many, many different people that have many different combinations of things. And so we had to focus in very quickly on one. And cancer was an obvious one, both because it is the future of the company, but also because it's a stand-in for how helpless patients feel, for the joy that you feel when you get better, for the gratitude to your physicians. I mean, it is a deeply emotive area to be able to communicate about, to sort of stand in for the innovation that we're doing more broadly. So there were lots of things that came up in the testing that, another example is brand fluency. So brand fluency is a measure of at what point do people realize that it's an ad coming from your company? And do they understand at the end, how many of them understand at the end that it's an ad coming from your company? Because you can have a really effective ad that nobody remembers who it was from. And also, you want to make sure that people understand what the source of the ad is, because if they don't understand the source and how to contextualize what you're trying to communicate, you can end up at the end of the ad with people feeling like they've been tricked in some way. So it's very important that they know who the ad is coming from. And the System 1 testing that we did helped us. For those of you familiar with the ad, there's a point where you see a Pfizer scientist pop up and look at the protagonist in the ad. It's a real Pfizer scientist. But the amount of time that scientist is on the screen is actually very, very tightly managed, because you want to make sure that people know it's a Pfizer ad, but you do not want to be coming across as if you're taking credit for the patient's success. And so the line between those two things is a very finely balanced, nuanced sort of situation, because what you are celebrating is the triumph of the patient and your contribution to what's happened to the patient. You're not celebrating yourself. And that's a very important distinction. But that was something that we worked very hard on in the research to make sure that we could achieve both of those two things.
So there were versions where you could see more of the scientist, and you had to limit that because the audience watching was not responding in the way you wanted.
Yeah, and there were also versions where we saw less of the scientist and people missed that it was a Pfizer ad. So like those two things, trying to get that balance right on both ends was quite important.
This is really interesting. I know that both of you have been nodding. Do you have any insights that you want to share about constructing an ad and the way in which it plays in the marketplace?
Well, I'll share a little bit different take on this. And, having used ad testing for many years, we started to look at how do we do similar type of testing on our communications, on the language we're putting out in thought leadership, on our website. How do we get very specific on how different audiences are going to react to that language? Who's going to use that language for something that maybe they can, spend time with a client on? So what we've done, back to AI a bit, we've built AI agents that will actually look at our communications from many different lenses or perspectives. So we have an understanding of how this key audience is going to think and what are the major takeaways going to be. Are there any red flags in this from an audience that maybe we'd have some concern that they're going to look for certain things in it? And so spending that time to create dozens of personas, of all different personas in AI, and these AI agents will then scrub all of the work we're doing from a communications perspective to ensure that we're getting the message across that we want to get across, and also making sure that we're not putting something out there inadvertently that could trip us up in the future. So taking a lot of the things that we do from a marketing perspective, importing those over to the broader communications side of the house has been really important for us to get those communications right. We're doing that for internal communications as well, right? So we don't just do it for external, but we're doing it from an internal perspective to make sure that we're hitting our internal audiences in the way that makes sense and is really relevant for them.
I was nodding because in the testing process, it really is amazing the difference a half second makes.
Completely.
It's wild.
Astonishing.
It can take something from the red area to the green area. And also to add to that, the difference that we see when we globally test it, the same piece of content in UK audiences versus US audiences. And it's not intuitive to me before going through this process that those cultures are that tremendously different, that the half second optimization would be a red in one country and a green in the other, and you make a tiny change and it's the reverse, you know. And if I try to take like some general principles out, it's like it's the stereotypes that like we used to just subjectively fight about, you know, before we took this
Exactly.
more data-driven approach. It was like, oh, you Americans just want to push metal off the lot. We're, you know, and we're putting art out in the world, and we're like, well, you're not even showing the car. And now we see it in the data, and it's like becomes now we're leading like scientists, and it's like it is true that Americans expect something very different of their advertising. They expect it to be a little more rational, a little more straightforward, simple, one, not all of the messages. And for whatever reason, the Brits can handle a lot more, you know, abstraction, deeper thought, like telling more of a robust story. You know, good on them. But it doesn't work in the U.S. So we've also improved dramatically by sort of advocating for more localizations and more attention to those tiny details.
That 1 second is interesting because it reminded me of actually an interview that I read that Lena Dunham gave when she was making the first season of Girls. Judd Apatow said that each shot was going on a little too long, so he actually wanted the transitions to be 1 second or half a second shorter, and she went in and did that to the pilot, and she said it changed the way in which the audience responded to the first episode, and then changed the way in which, for her, it was humor that she was trying to convey. It changed the way the humor played. So I think that is very, very interesting when you're talking about making an ad. It is essentially making a short film, right? And you're employing the same techniques that, you know, directors of film or TV shows use.
And particularly when you're talking about things that are highly emotive, you know, so like in our Super Bowl ad, for example, it's like 4 seconds where the kind of the arc is you see this patient and he's beaten his disease, and so there's a whole ticker tape parade. It's this fantasy sort of thing where he goes out and he's celebrating the fact that he's beaten his disease, and then right at the end of the ad, there's a couple of seconds where you flash back and you can see these still photos of what it was like in reality. So outside of the fantasy of his having beaten the disease, and you can see what it was actually like in the hospital, you know, him and his parents and, you know, that kind of thing. And it's an important part of the ad because it forces you to really think about what does it mean that he's beaten his disease, you know. So it lands on you in a really important way that if you didn't have that, it would just be celebratory and exciting, but it wouldn't be. But in the first version of the ad that we tested, it went on for 1 more second longer than what you see in the final ad. And what we found is that people were sad enough by the end of that 1 additional second that they were no longer paying attention to the message that came next, which was, you know, Pfizer is fighting for 8 breakthroughs in cancer by 2030, which is deeply hopeful. When you brought that little flashback back by 1 second, people got the poignancy of what it would actually mean to this person and their family to have beaten the disease, but we're still able to acknowledge and recognize the hopeful message and end on a hopeful point. I was shocked at how that 1 second made such a difference in terms of people's comprehension of what we were trying to communicate.
That's so interesting, and actually brings me to my next question, which is how important is emotion, feelings, nostalgia when communicating with your consumers?
It's everything in luxury automotive. No one's buying a $150,000 car to get to, you know, from A to B, right? It's not a rational purchase or utilitarian purpose. You're buying into that product because you're buying the brand and sort of access to a very elite community or tribe. So I think marketers intuit that, and we've tried to bring it to life a lot through experiential. You know, the Range Rover example is Range Rover House, which is live now in Park City. We do it every year in Park City and Pebble Beach, and it's been a fun exercise for marketers to just think like, if Range Rover the brand were a house, literally, what would it look like? What would it smell like? What food would you serve? Who would you invite? You know, and it opens up all this creativity. It's all about that emotional experience. You know, of course the product's there and we tell a story, but it's so much more about the people you meet there and the feeling you get when it's part of your identity.
Smell is so interesting. So what kind of smell do you try to capture?
We do have a signature smell in the JLR dealerships, so that transcends the 4 brands, but it was thoroughly tested and managed by the creative team in the UK headquarters. It's a lovely smell. I can't tell you what the notes are, but all of our retail stores have it, which is a trend we borrowed from like high-end hotels and such. But yeah, like the food you eat is a huge part of the experience. So we wanted Range Rover House to be nothing like, a tent set up on the side of Pebble Beach. It's actually at a private home, like a really extraordinary private home in the Monterey area, and it echoes the sort of architectural design language, the reductive design language of Range Rover, and you get the vibe. You walk on the scene and you're like, ooh, I feel like I'm in Succession. I quote Succession a lot because that show was really successful for us, but it's that stealth wealth kind of vibe.
Succession was successful. Why?
We were heavily placed throughout that show, and it's one of my favorite kind of examples of branded entertainment. I think it works really, really well as a way to have the experts whose job it is to be complete experts at creating culture and writing beautifully and directing beautifully and casting beautifully to create a world. And when you find those magic connections that, like, it's a perfect fit for our brand, yes, like take as many Range Rovers as you want to bring, use in the show, and it's done a lot. We've measured just what it's done from a brand lift standpoint, and even potentially back to incremental sales. And that show in particular has done a lot for Range Rover.
Steve, sorry, I know I kept asking follow-up questions. I knew you wanted to weigh in.
I was interested in what as well, having watched that show and seeing the brand
The
show up.
gentleman, Theo James is our new guy.
It's really, really interesting. And so, you think about, especially on the business client side, people typically think, well, people are making a decision purely based on numbers and logic, and they're going through the process. Does this, business decision make the most sense for my company? And I think that's a lot of the way that, in the past, marketers would market to business clients. It's not about that. It's about the emotion of the person making that decision and what they're going to feel when that decision makes sense and gives them that boost in whether it's their job and their career and how they're looked at as a team or their company's results. And so we focus less on here are the exact specifics of a product and all the little details, and more what's that value proposition to you as a decision maker at your company. How are you going to feel? What is that going to change in how you're perceived, how you feel when you have the outcomes that you're striving toward and trying to reach? And this has taken place in many different forms. We're looking at some products where, in typical products, it's what is the dollar amount that we have done? And that's really how we focused. How many dollars have we put through the system? And when we sat down and talked to clients, it was less important how many dollars we've done, because they know we've done a lot of dollars and they know that can work for them. It's how is that going to make them look and feel going forward, having made the right decision and having the kind of the impact that they wanted. So from a business client perspective, typically emotion is thought of as a less important part of the selling and the marketing process. It isn't. It is the most important part, and the numbers can follow behind.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I think emotion and emotional resonance is absolutely critical. Obviously, you want to get across sort of the reason to use your product, but if you think about health in particular, the decisions that you make for your own health, the decisions that you make for the health of the people that you love is a deeply emotive topic. And so the real thing is, how do you cut through with the fact that they are being served lots and lots of messages from lots and lots of different companies across lots and lots of different channels? If you can tap into the emotion associated with the seriousness of these decisions and the importance of these decisions, you can cut through and get them to pay attention to the message. So in my head, it's not about manipulating the message. It's more about how do you support them to understand a balanced view of what the message is so that they can make informed decisions. But in order to support them to do that, you have to be cutting through. They have to be paying attention to what you're saying. And emotion, I think, is one of the ways in which you can set yourself apart and be able to get that sort of resonance.
I wanted to talk, we've talked about your Super Bowl ad being very, very successful. We've also talked about social media and how important it is to unveil something on X and creating buzz and chatter. So I want to talk a little bit more about social media. How do you use social media to interact with the world? And how do you look at social media versus traditional media when it comes to messaging something?
So I think we're probably earlier in our stage than a company like Jaguar would be in terms of how we think about social media. We do have, so if you take the Super Bowl as an example, we had a partnership with LL Cool J. So his wife was diagnosed with cancer many years ago. He's quite passionate about early detection and prevention. And we were working with him on securing the rights for the song for the ad, and then realized how passionate he was about helping to support early detection and diagnosis for cancer, and then created a partnership with him around that. And his social media presence was incredibly important and useful to the campaign, but I think it was also because it was authentic. He really cared about it. And I think the best sort of partnerships that you have with influencers, working on social media, are the ones that are not doing it for the paycheck, but are doing it because it's a cause that they care about, and trying to find those influencers. They might have a smaller audience, but if it's a message that is really authentic and something that matters deeply to them, the resonance of that, I think, is much stronger than if you're going for somebody who's sort of hot right now, but is sort of not so excited about what you're trying to communicate. So that relationship, I think, with influencers and how you work with social media on that is emerging to us as being particularly important in terms of how we communicate about our products. But again, we are not like, our jam is HCP advertising, consumer advertising. We're earlier stage than something that would be a pure consumer brand. So I'd be keen to know what the others think.
Steve, can you talk a little bit, given that you're not trying to reach millions of people, do you use social media in terms of positioning your bank, or is that something that isn't as important?
Yeah, social media, a very important component of what we do, and you think of it in three ways, right? There's obviously paid social media that's critical to reaching audiences and reaching very specific audiences with messages from a business client perspective. The second is influencers, right? And finding the influencers who are influencing the decision makers that we want to reach. And that's a kind of a unique and different way that we've gone about finding those people out there in the ecosystem that you wouldn't think are going to influence a corporate treasurer in how they're going to make a decision, but they are. And so we want to be able to figure out how do we get to them so that they can show something that's going to influence the corporate treasurer to make a decision. And then the third way is engagement, right? So the engagement with our brand. And this is really important. And if we think about LinkedIn, for example, we look at our number of followers, and that we obviously track our followers on LinkedIn very closely. But more importantly, we look at the engagement with our brand, engagement with what we're putting out on social media. And what's important to us is to be ahead of the competitors, not in the number of people that are on our LinkedIn, but the engagement with those people, and making sure we could pay to get more people out there. But what's more important is getting the right ones, and the ones that we want to be engaged, so that we can push messages out, so that we can make sure that they understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. And that's absolutely critical for business client brand, is to figure out new and different ways to engage and not just show up, but actually have that conversation.
Would you say LinkedIn is the most important for a bank?
I think for many kind of business client organizations, LinkedIn is an absolute critical component. It's the one where your audiences are on there, exactly what they do, where they work, what they're doing, and so you're able to reach those in very different ways than you would from a Facebook or a TikTok or another social outlet.
Charlotte, what platforms does Jaguar use, and is there a favorite?
So for most of our brands, growth and awareness and upper funnel is our primary areas of focus. So we are more focused on paid and conquesting channels, whether it's on the Metas of the world or on TV. It's a little more paid than organic focus. However, I would highlight a really beautiful program we've run now for going on 4 or 5 years called the Defender Service Awards, which has really tapped into sort of a grassroots organic promotion that adds a lot of gravitas and authenticity to the program, but also some legit growth. And the program works in an interactive way whereby we invite local charities, and we specifically look for very grassroots local organizations who do very hands-on physical work in their communities in a few categories like animal welfare, veteran services, et cetera, a few. And we invite them to send in a video submission and to kind of compete for a chance to win a Defender. And then we invite consumers to vote. And through pretty organic grassroots momentum, we've recently had 500,000 people participate in voting. We'd like to make the program a lot bigger going forward. But a lot of that activity happens not from us pushing the votes, but the organizations, the charities themselves. And they lean a lot on their organic social channels. And they say, please go out, go on this platform and vote for us so we can win a Defender. So it's a really authentic way to build awareness amongst a community of people who share the brand value of being heroic and adventurous and purposeful. The brand is about not being just off-road for the fun of it and getting dirty in the mud, but like going out and doing something. And that's what these charities do by being heroes in their communities. So that's been a pretty cool program for us that taps into organic social.
What is the value of having engagement like that, where it's someone voting, it's philanthropy, it feels higher impact than maybe just seeing a video on TikTok or something on Threads?
I think it's that word of mouth that people are hearing about it from these organic sources, charities in their communities, versus hearing it from us, the advertiser, is one. But also the content. We get so much content out of it. Some of it's really high production quality because the charity knows someone who knows a producer and they make something really beautiful. Or some of it's like really scrappy and backyard iPhone content, and they're all great. And they all showcase what the vehicle can do and tell a good product story, but through the lens of why, and the purpose of it. It's not just us telling you the specs.
This has been a really, really wonderful conversation. We have just a few minutes left. And so I wanted to end with talking about, where do you see the future for your brands? And Susan, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about Pfizer as we're looking ahead into the future. What are some conversations that you're having, and what are some discussions that would be interesting for our audience here at South by Southwest?
So I hope, if we kind of fast forward to 2030, that Pfizer has solidified itself as a cancer company, a company that is known for having delivered breakthroughs in cancer and really transforming the care of cancer in this country and around the world. So I mentioned at the very beginning, we're sort of starting our latest journey into this space. But we have, I think, 5 of our cancer medicines in the last 10 years have become standards of care across many of the most prevalent types of cancer that exist. And like I said, we have 8 breakthroughs that we're targeting between now and 2030. So our future is going to be about tackling this horrible, horrendous disease and seeing if we can make a real difference.
What is it about cancer research that gives you hope? What is the message that you want the world to know?
So what I think is interesting about the future of cancer research is that the modalities and the mechanisms of action that have been created over the last several years are wide, and there's a huge variety of them. So if you look at Pfizer, for example, we have 3 different types of cancer medicines that we're actively researching, each of which has its own set of promises. So it's not just creating incremental gains on things that exist. It's really, there's a potential for us to actually have revolutions in how we're developing new therapies and new treatments. So it's a very exciting time.
It is, and very encouraging. Steve, tell us about the future of your banking.
Yeah, that's an exciting, that's a tough one to follow. So we,
Literally curing cancer.
yeah,
We're on it.
I know. How can we compete? How can we?
Our
compete with
scientists
that?
are working every day on it.
curing cancer, right? So it's interesting. We as a company have been very siloed into products. We have 3 high-level business lines, but really 9 different business lines with 100 or so products that we think about selling and working with clients on how do they adopt those products. But we've never really spent time on how do we help our clients adopt a broad suite of products and solutions that can help them across whatever life cycle and journey that they're making. And that's been a pretty big shift for us. So we started to shift our model of how we operate the entire company to go from a bunch of lines of business that are selling directly in to thinking about how can we be more for our clients. And that's one of our strategic pillars, is ensuring that we can offer the products and services across a broad range and suite of different places to help our clients and help them fulfill their growth needs from a financial perspective. It's a massive shift, and I know a lot of companies have thought about how do we do that. We've done it in a way that we're breaking across those silos and those barriers, creating solutions that will touch 3 or 4 parts of a client or a client's organization, and doing it in a way that we make sure that we're not breaking anything, right? And that the individual products and services are working, but once you have them together, from a client perspective, you're getting a lot more from BNY. So it's a very big shift. So in 10 years, we really want to be known as what we call a platforms company, that we're providing platforms to our clients, not single products and services.
Is there one sector that you think BNY is going to grow the most in the next 10 years?
It's really interesting. So we're about 60% domestic, about 40% international, and we've been looking at that. Because most of, I said over 90% of Fortune 100 already do some sort of banking with us, our opportunity doesn't exist, as much in driving in new clients. It really exists in deepening the relationships with current clients, and that's the way we're thinking about it, and that's why a platform model can be really helpful for us. We look at like how many products per customer, and we look at customers or clients with 3 or more products. We've increased that by 30% year over year, so really focused on deepening those relationships across as the way for us to grow.
Charlotte, tell me about the future of Jaguar.
I think there's a lot of interesting transformation underway with the go-to-market model in automotive and companies trying new things. And it's, in some ways, there's a lot of exciting potential and new technologies to enable a seamless omni-channel experience. And in other ways, we have some really long-standing, deeply entrenched, legally protected relationships with our dealers, and we need to respect that, and that we sell through independent franchisees and wholesalers. So it's like constant experimentation and testing and working at this transformation of honoring these principles that customers understandably expect, a sense of transparency in pricing and a good variety of choices for the products they're looking for, and the ability to start and stop their journey online and in store or be seamless. So trying to get closer to that with a combination of technology and just partnership with retailers is like a long journey that we'll be focusing on.
And how do you get younger generations to get excited about Jaguar? Let's end on that.
About the Jaguar brand in particular, I think we sure made a splash this year. So that was a strong start, and now it's up to us to just maintain excitement and momentum because we have some time before the car actually starts being revealed, taking orders, et cetera. But I think these values of rebelliousness and flash and schema, flexibility, and all that stuff I talked about, it feels pretty modern and young to me, and at least opens the door for some pretty exciting creative collaborations to come.
I think rebelliousness and flash could best describe the three of you. Thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys all for coming. This has been a great panel.
Thank you.
Have a great South by Southwest.